What if you spent $2,000 on a brand new American tractor and it exploded on your first day? Or your transmission dissolved in a field while harvest season ticked away? These aren't horror stories. These are real machines built by real American companies that farmers despised with a burning passion. Today we're counting down the 10 most hated American tractors that nobody wanted and the wild, disastrous reasons why. Number 10. The Minneapolis-Moline UDLX Comfort Tractor. We're kicking things off with one of the strangest commercial failures in American agricultural history. A machine that was genuinely revolutionary, but missed its market so badly it's almost painful to read about. In 1938, Minneapolis-Moline unveiled the UDLX Comfort Tractor to a crowd of roughly 12,000 farmers at a grand showroom event in Minneapolis. The crowd reaction? Shock, and not the good kind. Here's what made the UDLX so bizarre. It was a farm tractor that wanted to be a luxury automobile. It came fully enclosed in a streamlined cab, complete with a heater, a radio, a cigarette lighter, an ashtray, a speedometer, a clock, a padded upholstered double seat, safety glass windows, and windshield wipers. The top road speed was 40 miles per hour. Minneapolis-Moline literally marketed this thing as a vehicle you could plow your fields in by day and drive your wife to town in by evening. The engineering team had actually done independent market research before building it. And that research showed that over 50% of American farmers said they wanted a tractor with an enclosed cab. Minneapolis-Moline took that survey at face value and went all in on 3 years of development, including desert testing in the Mojave. But here's the brutal reality. Those 50% of farmers who said they wanted a cab tractor did not show up to buy the UDLX, because the price tag was $21,505 at a time when a comparable John Deere or Farmall cost about $1,000. A brand new 1938 Ford Deluxe automobile sold for $725. Farmers who wanted the UDLX could have bought a standard Minneapolis-Moline U tractor and a Ford car and still had money left in their pocket. Beyond the price, the cab itself turned out to be uncomfortable, too low, too narrow, and with fixed side windows it turned into an oven in summer heat. And while it looked sleek and modern, it was still fundamentally a farm tractor with farm tractor mechanical drum brakes, which could barely stop it at 40 mil. Only about 150 UDLX units were ever produced. Many of the unsold ones were shipped back to the factory in Hopkins, Minnesota, stripped of their fancy bodywork and converted into standard U-model tractors to be sold at a discount. Today, surviving UDLX comfort tractors sell for over $100,000 at auction, the ultimate irony of a flop becoming priceless. Number 9. The Farmall 560 by International Harvester, 1958-1963. If you want a case study in how bad news travels fast, look no further than the Farmall 560. In 1958, International Harvester introduced its modernized 60 series tractors, the Farmall 460, 560, and 6060. The 560 was supposed to be IH's answer to the powerful John Deere 730 and the growing demand for high-horsepower row crop machines. It had a new modern look, 6-cylinder engines available in gasoline, LP gas and diesel, and it was rated for 5 plows. It looked great on paper. But here's where IH made a critical mistake. They put a bigger, more powerful engine into a rear-end drivetrain that was essentially carried over from the older 440/50 models, and they didn't test it hard enough under real field conditions. The extra horsepower from the new 6-cylinder engine accelerated bearing wear in the bull gear assembly of the rear end. Ball bearings would deteriorate, fall out of their cage, and jam between the bull gear and the cast rear-end housing. When that happened, the housing would catastrophically fail. We're talking parts flying, rear ends destroyed, tractors dead in the field, and it happened in the worst places, in sticky, heavy gumbo soils where farmers were pulling 5 bottom plows at maximum load. The failures were regional but absolutely catastrophic in the affected areas. And this was 1959, when 2/3 of American households had telephones. Bad news traveled from the field to the feed store to the phone and back again at lightning speed. In mid-1959, International Harvester issued a sweeping recall, one of the first major tractor recalls in American history, covering the 460, 560, and 660, whether they'd failed or not. Dealerships replaced the rear-end components under warranty. It's rumored IH spent $19 million to fix those tractors, which in today's money is well over $200 million. I handled the recall quickly and professionally. The fixed 560s were solid tractors, but the damage to IH's reputation was immense. Farmers who had seen their neighbors' rear ends blow up weren't buying another IH tractor anytime soon. John Deere began gaining the lead in market share it would never give back. Industry analysts point to the 560 fiasco as one of the pivotal moments that began the slow unraveling of International Harvester as a company, a decline that ended in their merger with Case in Number 8. The Ford 6000 Commander, 1961 to 1967. Ford has a proud heritage of reliable American farm tractors. The 8N, the 9N, the 5000, legends of American agriculture. But in 1961, Ford launched the 6000, and it became a very different kind of legend. The Ford 6000 was Ford's bold attempt to shed its image as a small tractor company and compete in the higher horsepower market. It was a handsome machine wearing Ford's classic red and gray livery, powered by either a 203 cubic inch gasoline engine or a 242 cubic inch diesel, producing 66 horsepower. The centerpiece feature was the Selecto-Speed PowerShift transmission, a genuinely innovative 10-speed transmission that allowed operators to shift gears on the fly without clutching. For 1961, that was cutting-edge technology. The problem? The Selecto-Speed, quickly nicknamed SOS by the farming community, and the name turned darkly appropriate, simply could not stand up to the 66 horsepower the engine produced. Under heavy fieldwork, the transmission's components began failing rapidly, and the early 6000s were riddled with hydraulic leaks too. Ford's response was almost as strange as the problem itself. Rather than immediately redesigning the transmission to handle more torque, Ford chose to detune the engine, reducing the horsepower to protect the transmission. When the 6000 was retested at the Nebraska Tractor Test Laboratory in 1963, it now produced only 62 horsepower. You read that right. Ford's solution to a weak transmission was to give farmers less power, the slogan they wisely never used. Now with less power for in an almost unheard-of move at the time, Ford recalled all the 6000s and rebuilt them. When they were re-released in 1963, they wore a new blue and white paint scheme and a new name, the 6000 Commander. The paint job and name change was clearly an attempt to distance the updated tractor from the disastrous originals. By 1965, the transmission was finally strengthened enough to bring the horsepower back up to 66. The 6000 Commander never fully recovered its reputation, though. Finding mechanics who understood the Selecto-Speed transmission was famously difficult. Even experienced Ford dealers often refused to work on them. Parts availability for the SOS transmission became a nightmare. Today, surviving Ford 6000s are extremely rare and considered collector pieces, precisely because so few remain in working condition. One old Ford dealer famously told a potential buyer to run the other way. Number 7. The Oliver 1900. Now here's a tractor that was genuinely powerful and genuinely polarizing, depending entirely on who you ask. The Oliver 1900 was introduced in 1960 and powered by a General Motors Detroit diesel 453 two-stroke engine, a 212 cubic inch four-cylinder powerhouse that at 2200 RPM could produce close to 100 horsepower at the PTO. That was extraordinary power for 1960. Oliver's relationship with Detroit diesel dated back to 1954 with the Super 99 GM, and these engines had a stellar reputation in trucking and industrial applications. So why did the Oliver 1900 end up on this list? Because the GM Detroit Diesel 453 was a two-stroke engine, and two-stroke diesel engines are a completely different animal from the four-stroke engines every other tractor was using. They require a specific operating style. You cannot coddle them. You cannot idle them for long periods. They'll wet stack, leaving unburned fuel and oil in the exhaust. You must drive them hard under load. They are ear-splittingly loud. At full throttle in a field, neighbors could hear an Oliver 1900 from several miles away. They are fuel-thirsty. They leak oil and fuel as a matter of course. Farmers accustomed to conventional four-stroke Farmalls and John Deeres were completely unprepared for the demands of a Detroit diesel. Mechanics at most dealerships had never worked on two-stroke diesels. Maintenance schedules were different, operating philosophy was different, And when something went wrong, which it did, through owner misuse as often as mechanical fault, repairs were expensive and specialists nearly impossible to find in rural America. The 1900 also suffered from transmission and final drive problems when owners neglected proper lubrication, leaving drained oil that looked like black metallic paint, a sure sign of expensive internal damage. The Oliver 1900 was built in just 3 series over 4 years before Oliver quietly moved to more conventional power plants. Today, it's a cult classic, admired by the mechanically adventurous. But in its day, most farmers took one look at the maintenance requirements, heard the banshee howl of that GM diesel, and walked away. Number 6. The Case 1200 Traction King, 1964-1969. The 1960s were the decade when American tractor manufacturers raced to produce more horsepower and enter the four-wheel drive market. Case threw its hat in the ring with the 1200 Traction King in 1964, a massive articulated four-wheel drive tractor rated at 120 horsepower. On paper, the Case 1200 looked like a serious contender. It was a purpose-built four-wheel drive machine designed for the large acreage grain and wheat farmers of the Great Plains, who were demanding bigger, more powerful equipment. The articulated steering design, where the tractor bends in the middle to turn, was a smart engineering choice for a machine of that size. But the 1200 was plagued by significant reliability problems right out of the gate. The hydraulic systems were notoriously problematic, causing major headaches with steering response and implement control. The drivetrain components had durability issues under sustained heavy use, and perhaps most critically, Case's dealer network was not adequately prepared to service such a specialized and complex machine. When something broke on a Case 1200 in the middle of harvest season on a remote Great Plains farm, getting parts and getting it fixed was an ordeal. Competitive pressure made things worse. The Steiger brothers in North Dakota had begun building their own no-nonsense four-wheel drive tractors that farmers found more reliable and more powerful. Versatile of Canada was building four-wheel drive machines with strong reputations. The Case 1200 struggled to establish itself against these alternatives. Production was relatively limited, and the tractor was discontinued in 1960. Case would go on to produce much more successful large tractors, but the 1200 Traction King remains a cautionary tale about rushing large, complex machinery to market without adequate field testing. Number 5. The Allis-Chalmers D-21, 1963-1969. Allis-Chalmers built some genuinely great tractors over the decades. The WD-45, the D-17, respected, reliable machines that farmers trusted. So in the early 1960s, when Allis-Chalmers set out to build the most powerful two-wheel drive tractor in American history, expectations were high. The D-21 arrived in 1963, powered by Allis-Chalmers' own 4.6 cubic inch 6-cylinder diesel engine, initially rated at 127 horsepower at the PTO, making it the most powerful two-wheel drive row crop tractor in the country at the time of its introduction. Allis-Chalmers was proud of it. Dealers were excited. Farmers were interested. But the D-21 ran into problems that became familiar to anyone who follows this era of American tractor history. It was underdeveloped at the time of its release. The engine, in particular, had significant reliability issues in its early form. Cooling system problems led to overheating under sustained heavy loads. Fuel injection components proved difficult to keep properly calibrated. The sheer displacement and power output pushed the engine to its limits in ways the engineers hadn't fully solved before shipping. Allis-Chalmers did improve the D-21 over its production run, eventually releasing the Series 2 with a turbocharged version producing even more power. But the early reputation problems stuck. Farmers who had paid premium prices for a tractor they considered the pinnacle of American two-wheel drive power were deeply frustrated by breakdowns during their busiest seasons. The D-21's launch period represented exactly the kind of costly mistake that erodes brand loyalty. Farmers who bought early models and had problems didn't come back for the improved versions. They went to John Deere. And Allis-Chalmers never fully recovered its competitive position in the high horsepower segment. Number 4. The Massey-Harris 333, 1956-1957. Massey-Harris had a complicated reputation among American farmers, even at its peak. The brand was known for quality in some lines, but quirky ergonomics, heavy steering, and inconsistent reliability in others. The 333, produced for just 2 model years from 1956 to 1957, managed to crystallize many of the complaints that followed the brand. The 333 was positioned as a utility and row crop machine with a 4-cylinder Continental gasoline engine. On specs alone, it wasn't a dramatically bad tractor. But the execution fell short in ways that mattered enormously to working farmers. The steering was notoriously heavy and imprecise. Spending a full day working ground with a 333 was physically exhausting in a way that competing tractors from Farmall or John Deere simply weren't. The hydraulic system had issues maintaining consistent lift pressure, making implement control frustrating. But the deeper problem for Massey-Harris in this era was a brand-level identity crisis. The 1953 merger with Ferguson to form Massey-Harris-Ferguson, which became Massey-Ferguson in 1958, created genuine confusion in the marketplace. Dealers weren't sure which machines to push. Farmers were uncertain which tractor line represented the company's future. The 333 arrived in the middle of this corporate turbulence and was discontinued after only 2 model years, leaving early buyers with a machine that had limited dealer support and minimal parts inventory almost immediately. Former owners recall the 333 as a tractor that required constant attention and never quite felt dialed in. In a market where John Deere's 2-cylinder models and Farmall's Letter Series machines had decades of dealer familiarity and parts availability, the 333's short production run and corporate confusion made it an unappealing proposition for farmers who needed dependable long-term support. Number 3. The John Deere 2010, 1961. Now this one is going to raise some eyebrows, because this is a John Deere, and John Deere fans are passionate. But the historical record is clear. The 2010 was one of the most troubled tractors John Deere produced during its legendary New Generation era. In 1959, John Deere famously launched its New Generation tractors, the 3010, 4010, and others, and they were genuinely revolutionary, smooth, powerful, operator-friendly machines that modernized American agriculture overnight. The 2010, introduced in 1961 as a smaller sibling, was supposed to carry that same engineering excellence into a lighter utility class. It did not. The 2010 was plagued by problems that its larger siblings never suffered. The transmission, particularly the synchro range version, was notoriously difficult to shift smoothly and prone to grinding and gear selection failures. The hydraulic control valves frequently needed rebuilding. The engine ran warm, making sustained heavy use in hot weather a gamble. And in some configurations, particularly the LP gas version, crankshaft failures were reported. Farmers documented crankshafts breaking twice within 1,100 hours of operation. Dealers who worked on 2010s describe it as the new generation tractor that didn't quite make it through the door, ready for the field. The engineering priority during the new generation development had focused heavily on the larger models, and the 2010 showed it. Farmers who bought one expecting the quality they'd heard about in the 4010 and 3010 were bitterly disappointed. One former owner famously wrote that the 2010 must have been built on a Monday morning using parts shoveled off the floor. And it runs through tractor forums to this day as one of the most colorful condemnations of any American tractor ever built. John Deere corrected most of the issues as the 2010's production run continued, but the early years of that tractor left a sour taste in the mouths of many loyal Deere customers. Number 2. The International Harvester 2+2 Series, 1979 to 1984. By the late 1970s, International Harvester was in serious trouble. The company had expanded far beyond farm equipment into construction, refrigeration, trucks, and more, and it was struggling to keep up in the horsepower race against John Deere's increasingly dominant lineup. The response? The 2+2 Series, one of the most controversial tractor designs in American history. The IH 2+2, so named because it had 2 front drive wheels and 2 rear drive wheels, was an articulated 4-wheel drive tractor with a radically unconventional layout. Unlike most tractors where the engine sits at the front, the 2+2's cab sat over the front axle, while the engine was located midship between the 2 axles. The result was a machine with a hood that seemed to stretch on forever behind the driver. Critics called it one of the most hideous-looking tractors ever built. A hood a mile long was a common description from IH dealers and farmers alike. The looks alone would have been forgivable if the machine performed brilliantly. But the 2+2 had significant mechanical problems. particularly with the articulation joints and the complex hydraulic systems required to make the four-wheel drive work properly under varying field conditions. The strange cab-forward layout compromised visibility in ways that made daily fieldwork frustrating, and the timing was catastrophic. IH launched the 2+2 just as the company was heading toward the financial crisis that would ultimately force it to sell its agricultural equipment division to Case in night. Dealer support for the 2+2 deteriorated as IH's financial position collapsed. Parts availability became an issue. Farmers who had gambled on the new design found themselves holding machines with uncertain futures and increasingly difficult service situations. The 2+2 stands as a monument to what happens when a company tries to innovate its way out of a fundamental business crisis rather than addressing the root problems. It didn't save International Harvester, and it didn't win over American farmers either. Number 1. The Ford Versatile 976, and here we are. Number 1. The most hated American branded tractor on our list. And it's a machine that proves once and for all that buying a famous name badge does not guarantee you a great machine. The Versatile 976 came about when Ford purchased the Versatile Farm Equipment Company of Winnipeg, Canada, in the late 1970s to gain a foothold in the large four-wheel drive tractor market. Versatile had built a solid reputation in Canada with their big articulated tractors, particularly models like the 950, a machine that farmers genuinely loved for its reliability and pulling power. When Ford absorbed Versatile and began selling these machines under the Ford Versatile name in the American market, farmers assumed they were getting the same quality engineering with Ford's dealer support network behind it. The 976 was supposed to be the successor to the beloved 950, more horsepower, same dependability. It was rated at 280 horsepower, which put it firmly in the class of machines competing with John Deere's 8960 and the big Steigers. On paper, it should have been a monster. Instead, the 976 became infamous. The hydraulics were described by farmers as piss-poor, weak, inconsistent, and unreliable for the heavy implement work these big tractors were designed to do. The air conditioning system blew dirt directly into the operator's face. Farmers consistently reported that the 976 pulled like it had less horsepower than the 950 it was supposed to replace, despite being rated 12 horsepower higher on paper. The build quality felt light for a tractor of its size and price, and the transmission had a nasty habit of locking up in 2 gears simultaneously, an extremely dangerous situation, particularly when driving on public roads. One farmer's account captures it perfectly. He was driving the 976 at night on a road at the top of a hill when the transmission locked up in 2 gears at once. He had to stop traffic, get underneath the tractor with a wrench and hammer while a pickup truck pulled on it, and manually free the linkage in the dark. That same fall, the 976 was traded straight across for a John Deere 8960. By all accounts, it was the best trade of his farming career. The 976's failure was particularly painful because the 950 Versatile it replaced had been so well regarded. Farmers who had loved the 950 felt betrayed. The marriage of Ford's corporate management and Versatile's engineering had produced something neither brand's fans wanted. Production on the 976 series was relatively brief, and it was succeeded by improved models, but the damage to the Versatile name in the American market took years to repair. The 976 stands as our #1 most hated American tractor, a machine that took a beloved predecessor, strapped a famous name badge on it, and still managed to disappoint nearly everyone who paid good money to operate one. If you made it all the way to the end, hit that like button and leave me a comment below. I want to know, have you ever operated one of these machines? Did your dad or grandfather own one? Drop it in the comments. I read every single one. Subscribe if you haven't already. We've got a lot more farming history coming your way. And until next time, keep the iron running, keep the rubber side down, and we'll see you in the next video.